customize it to your team or make it open to everyone, as we're doing here, because we felt that this topic was really super important and would be of interest to multiple organizations. So without further ado, I'll introduce Adrienne Turner, who you all know, who's sitting right in front of you with an awesome background here. Adrienne is TCN's training manager, and so she does a lot of our trainings, but she also coordinates all of our trainings. So she does many, many things in addition to having her own business and being an author and, you know, just being generally amazing. So I'll turn it over to Adrienne, and I'm going to be popping back and forth from a meeting, but Ashley from TCN is here as well.
All right, thank you so much, Holly. So before we dive too deep, I want to let you all know that we have a special guest joining us, and that is Olivia Ohlenberg, and she is from Victim Services. I want to give Olivia an opportunity to share what Victim Services offers before we get started. And then she is the expert. Folks, I am not the expert, okay? I just know a lot of stuff on this subject, but Olivia will jump in and support me as needed. Right, Olivia, as I put you on the spot? You can unmute yourself.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I am here today to provide support in any way that I can. So my name is Olivia Ohlenberg. I am a prevention education specialist at Victim Services Center of Montgomery County. So I want to just give a little overview of what our agency provides to the community. Victim Services started out as Montgomery County's Rape Crisis Center in 1974, and we still specialized in trauma-informed care for victims of sexual violence. But since the 70s, we have expanded to servicing victims of all types of crime as well as their loved ones. So Victim Services provides many different types of services for the community, including free and confidential counseling services and advocacy. And we also have a 24/7 hotline that is available 365 days a year. So I can put all that information for you guys in the chat box. If you yourself find yourself in a situation where you need support, or if you have a loved one who has ever been a victim of a crime, I can put that info in the chat for you all. And then also, we provide education services, which is my role at the agency. We provide prevention education services to the community. Typically, we are in schools working with students from preschool age to all the way to college, working with them to build the skills and awareness that prevent sexual violence. And of course, like today, we also provide training and support for trainings for adult groups and professionals on a range of different topics like sexual harassment. And just a little bit about me and what my personal background looks like. Before coming to Victim Services, I was working in sexual harassment law for about 3 years down in the Baltimore, Maryland area as a dual legal assistant and paralegal. So you can say this topic is of particular interest of mine. While I don't want to say that I'm a total expert, I do have some expertise in the subject, so I'm happy to be here today to answer any questions or to provide clarity in any way that I can. So I'm going to put my information in the chat box as well as our agency information, and I'm looking forward to the rest of today's presentation.
All right, thank you so very much. So again, this all started because of Heather down at Multi-Services Center. We appreciate you. This training has been done a few times before for organizations to provide the information they need. Some organizations need it for, to make sure that they're staying in compliance with laws and such. And so that is what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to read my disclaimer kind of note kind of thing, all right, to get us started. So first of all, let's address the elephant in our rooms, okay, because we know that some people might be nervous, scared, or confused about the topic today, but I want to encourage you to view this as an opportunity to learn something that can help you to have healthier relationships with your coworkers. So you'll understand some of the do's and the don'ts, what are appropriate behaviors, what are some of the laws, and specifically, of course, we're focusing on sexual harassment. So this is not a male versus a female thing. I encourage you to listen, to share wise responses, and as I always say, to have a growth mindset. So we want to think in a way that enables us to move forward in having great discussion. So now I am going to share my screen. I invite you to enter information into the chat box. If you have questions, Ashley, who is our Associate Director of Communications, is managing the chat box. And then at the end, there's going to be kind of like a group test. So we're going to do some polls where you get to answer some questions and we get to have more discussion. So let me now get on over to sharing the screen and we'll get started formally with the presentation. So here we go. Sexual harassment prevention in the workplace. So our topics are going to start with an historical review. We'll talk about harassment and the law, some actions and behaviors, what you should do if you're a victim, and how you can be a supportive bystander. So let's begin with the historical review and the current climate. So sexual discrimination has been around since the Title VII Civil Acts of 1964. So it was amended to prohibit sexual discrimination at work. And in 1964, removed freedom of speech, expression, and the right to privacy. In 1977 was the first lawsuit won by Title VII. In 91, the act was amended, allowing for compensation of damages up to $300,000. In 1995 was the first court case involving sexual harassment of men. In 98, same-sex harassment became illegal. So before that, I guess it was legal. In 2017, that's when we started to learn about the Time's Up and the Me Too movement, which launched discussions in our workplaces about new workplace harassment laws. And as recent as last year, many states have made changes and updated their harassment laws. So what's the climate today? What are we seeing now? Well, Starbucks has had a few situations. There was an instance where 16 of their baristas were being sexually harassed by customers. And it made the news because although some individuals were banned from coming to the store, some managers let the regular customers continue. And some of that harassment even amounted to stalking. We know that sexual harassment is very prevalent on social media. That is one of the newest outlets where employers are seeing that type of behavior, where bosses or coworkers will make inappropriate or sexual advances to coworkers on like a Facebook, or Instagram, or a Snapchat. And then, of course, we're all probably familiar with the situation with Harvey Weinstein, who was very influential in Hollywood, and he has been convicted of some sex crimes. And that has led us to what we're seeing today with this Me Too movement. And Me Too movement was started by a woman named Tiana, and I know I'm not saying her name right, Burke. And that was started back in about 2006, and it was introduced as a way to promote empowerment and empathy for women who were exposed to abuse and also who belong to underprivileged communities. And then it got adapted into this larger initiative. So we have Time's Up and Time's Up Times 2. And Time's Up Times 2 really builds on the original movement, but it focuses also on promoting women into leadership roles where they were previously underrepresented. So what are some actions or behaviors that you think might be considered harassment in the workplace? So if you don't mind, just enter into the chat box what actions or behaviors would be considered harassment in the workplace based on what you already know. and Ashley is going to watch the chat box. Okay, I see something popped in there.
So, Adrian, it looks like gender bias, unwanted sexual advances or questions,
All right.
off-key comments that make you uncomfortable,
Okay. So there is direct and indirect harassment. And let's go through those. I see one more comment.
comments about body and invading personal space.
Ooh, that invading personal space,
Yep.
yes. So direct harassment can include things like being asked for sexual favors by your supervisor or coworker, being threatened by your supervisor or coworker, that unwanted touching, or being the target of offensive gestures. Ashley, you can feel free to speak out those responses in chat.
Sure. There is adult themed jokes and what are you doing later? Good morning, good looking.
Oh, even the comments, all right?
Yep.
So indirect harassment, though, can be showing someone sexual images, those comments and jokes that we just talked about, when your supervisor or coworker spread rumors about your sex life. And lastly, it can occur when a customer or client is acting inappropriately in a sexual manner toward you and your employer does not take action. So it can be direct or indirect. Now, when you think of harassment, who comes to mind? Most often, we think a woman. But does gender matter? Men harass women, women harass men, men harass men, and women harass women. So gender does not matter. So our goal is, regardless of what the law is, we expect all employees to act respectfully, professionally, and appropriately, and also to communicate openly with respect, especially if we're delivering or receiving feedback. So now let's talk about harassment and the law. Federal and state law prohibits Pennsylvania employers from discriminating against employees based on certain characteristics. So what comes to mind when you think of discrimination? And discrimination is treating others differently based on some particular characteristic trait of that individual. What comes to mind when we think of the type of discrimination that can happen in the workplace? You can put that right in the chat box.
Wage differences, age discrimination, special needs, mental health.
We're on fire. Look at this. Age, ethnicity, race, citizenship, genetic information, religion, color, national origin, sex, disability, pregnancy, veteran status. In Pennsylvania, the state law also prohibits discrimination, not just based on race, color, national origin, religion, but when it comes to sex, that includes pregnancy, it includes childbirth, and any related medical conditions. When it comes to disability in Pennsylvania, you cannot discriminate based on physical or mental discrimination. When it comes to education, you cannot harass or discriminate against individuals if they have a GED versus a high school diploma. And several cities in the United States even have their own laws protecting additional characteristics. So for example, in Philadelphia, it is illegal to discriminate against someone based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So harassment is a form of discrimination that consists of words, signs, jokes, pranks, intimidation, physical actions, or violence that is directed at an employee who is due what is called a protective status. So all of these are protective statuses. So the legal definition of sexual harassment is a form of sexual discrimination that is unlawful, and it is harassment based on sex, sexual orientation, self-identified or perceived sex, gender expression, gender identity, or the status of being transgender. I want to also let you know that if you have questions, please put in the chat box. If you don't understand what gender expression is or gender identity is, just type in a question mark, and then Ashley will let us know, because we want you to be able to understand the information that we are sharing. Continuing with the legal definition, again, this is based on federal and state laws. Sexual harassment is any unwelcome sexual advances or requests for sexual favors or any conduct of a sexual nature when it's quid pro quo. So what does that mean? Well, if you do this for me, then if you let me touch your leg, then I'll give you that promotion. Okay? So submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly, and it is a condition of the individual's employment or submission to or rejection of such conduct by individuals, and it is used for a basis for employment decisions. So if someone does not take your sexual advance, or you say, if you allow me to touch your breast, then I'll give you this promotion, that is considered quid pro quo. And then also a hostile work environment. So this is conduct that has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with someone's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. And I know that we're going to ask Victim Services and Olivia to come back next month and talk to us about the laws of a hostile work environment, because you could get in big trouble if that is a situation that is occurring in the workplace. Sex stereotyping. So we have to be careful here. It's harassing or discriminating against an individual because they don't conform to gender stereotypes. That is considered sexual harassment. So I have this picture here of the male nurse, because we usually see females in that role. But this would be considered harassment if it is discriminating based on personality traits that do not conform to traditional perceptions about how an individual's sex should look, an individual of a particular sex should look or act. Treating individuals differently because they don't look, act, speak, or live a lifestyle that conforms to gender norms. All this is considered sex stereotyping, and also harassment in response to an individual performing a job that is usually performed or was performed in the past mostly by persons of the opposite sex. I will tell you that I worked with a client about a year ago, and they wanted me to coach the client on the way that she dressed, because she worked in a male-dominated field in like a construction area, and they thought that her clothing was too revealing for the workplace. I personally didn't think it was, but that's an example of sex stereotyping, that they actually wanted to make her change the way she looked to look more male to fit in that role. The reasonable person standard. So we have this because when we are determining whether something is sexual harassment, the law says we have to employ what's called the reasonable person standard. So this is used by courts to assess whether this is reasonable. So is this conduct reasonable, by asking whether, an individual would find it offensive. So questionable behavior of a sexual neighbor will be judged not by its offensiveness to the complaining person, but whether it would be offensive to a reasonable person. And most people will stop behaviors known to offend others. So if you have any doubt about a behavior being unwelcomed or inappropriate, here's the thing: don't do it. So how do we define unwelcome? That's really hard. It's very subjective. So how does it translate into everyday work? Well, here's the thing. You have to know the person. You have to know how they banter. So if you tell a joke, and would a reasonable person think that that was sexually or harassment or inappropriate? So that's why we always say that you should err on the side of your own knowledge, err on the side of caution, because you really need to also be aware of who is around you. Because even if it's not directed at a particular person, you could be creating a hostile environment that is offensive to someone because they overheard that comment. So we have different enforcement agencies to support ensuring that we meet guidelines and refrain from inappropriate behavior, and that employers are doing what is necessary to create environments that are free from this type of abuse. So federally, we have the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, EEOC. And with the EEOC, an individual can file a complaint anytime within 300 days from the alleged discrimination. So in your workplaces, you should have a sexual discrimination policy. This information should be posted. You do not need an attorney to file a complaint with EEOC, but it must be filed within those 300 days. And you have to file with EEOC before you try to go to federal court. They're going to say, did you file this there? Well, we're not going to look at it until then. And for more information, you can visit their website. Now, under Pennsylvania law, you must file the complaint with the Human Relations Commission within 300 days after the last date you were sexually harassed at your job. So in Pennsylvania, it's got to go to the HRC within 300 days. And you first, though, have to notify your company in writing before you file that complaint with the Human Relations Commission. Is there anything that you want to add here, Olivia?
Yeah, so I did want to just clarify that the EEOC, their statute of limitations to file a complaint is actually 180 days,
Okay.
unless the state so like you said, the PA Human Relations Commission, unless their statute of limitations is longer, then they will follow the state local law, but federally it is 180 days. But like you said, PA is the Human Relations Commissions, and PA is 300, so they go by 300. But just wanted to clarify that federally it is a little bit lower.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
See, this is why we have the expert here. So we had the 300 for the Pennsylvania. Okay, moving on, local protections. So many localities enforce laws protecting individuals from sexual harassment and discrimination, and they can differ based on county, city, or town. So you need to find out what the laws are in your area. And harassment may constitute a crime if it involves things like physical touching, coerced physical confinement, or coerced sex acts. So if that is occurring, then you need to contact the local police in addition to your employer. And one of the biggest challenges I know that some organizations have had is you know, like the stalking, people showing up at somebody else's home. So if that happens, of course, you don't want to wait till you get back to your job and follow. You want to contact the police. So federally, the Title VII Civil Rights Act is the most significant piece of legislation regulating the equal opportunity in the United States. And federally, this is what we want to understand here in terms of the responsibility for the employer. So they employ what's called the negligence theory only. So an employer is not automatically liable. If you experience harassment at work, they're not automatically liable, only if they are negligent. So an employer is not liable if the employer exercises reasonable care, and if the employee unreasonably failed to take advantage of opportunities to avoid harm. So if the employer said, these are some things that we're going to put into practice to discourage, limit, and remove you from this harassing situation, and then as the employee, you fail to take advantage of that, then you can't go and say, well, my employer is liable. All right. It impacts employers with 15 or more employees, and there's no application. What this means is that if you're working at an organization as an independent contractor, a volunteer, or an unpaid intern, this does not apply to you for that employer that you're contracted to work with. You want to jump in at all, Olivia? You just jump in. So employers must take all reasonable steps. It is unlawful for employers to fail to take all reasonable steps to prevent discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. So let's look at some examples and some behaviors of harassment. Touching. Sexual and non-sexual in nature. So any type of touching can be a form of harassment and should be avoided. And that includes massaging, or we had someone say before, invading someone's personal space. But what do you think is the most inappropriate form of touching that might occur in the workplace and maybe other places? Anybody want to take a stab? What do you think is the most inappropriate touching that happens? All right, I'm going to give up the answer. Hugging. Now, I'm a big hugger, but I have had to learn that I literally have to ask someone, is it okay if I hug you? Because that could be misinterpreted. How about some other touching? Touching people's hair, a lingering handshake. You know, someone touches your hand and it makes you feel like, ooh. Touching a pregnant woman's belly. Too much eye contact. That's also under verbal. touching someone's back while working with them. I'm guilty of that. I'll walk up to someone and rub their back when I was in the workplace, but thank goodness I knew that person. See, that's the key point, so that they didn't view it as sexual in nature. But what are some effective or appropriate forms of touching? Anybody want to take a stab? So we can't hug, and we want to be careful that we're not misinterpreted. What could you do? All right, I see the chat box lit up.
I don't see anything yet, Adrian. Oh, here we go. Here, okay. Elbow to elbow.
Yes.
Fist pump.
Fist bump, yes. And of course, we're in a social distancing world now, right? But of course, a strong handshake is appropriate, and even a high five when we can touch again. Verbal harassment. So another example can be direct, those jokes, the gossip, the cursing, comments based on race or ethnicity, discussing one's personal life, or inquiring about their sexuality. So you can't ask someone, it could be interpreted as verbal harassment if you say, are you bisexual? You want to be careful of that. Also, oh, I'm getting my slide to go. Okay, I'm doing nonverbal behaviors. Looks, stares, giving somebody the elevator eyes. Anybody know what that is? You know, that longing look. Making offensive or sexual gestures. Body language that's offensive. Going back to, well, maybe this is written in electronic, but I was going to share even another type of behavior that we see, signing emails with XOXO. So that would be considered electronic harassment. Of course, showing people pictures and magazines or artwork or cartoons that are sexual in nature. And of course, sending and receiving inappropriate emails, sexting or texting, contacting someone after work hours. That could be a form of harassment that you have to be careful of. Even excluding someone in a group situation. How about rolling eyes when a person speaks? Outward signs of disagreement, like we're doing the head roll, you can't sit still, and all of that creates an environment that could be hostile and that could get you in trouble. Dress code. So be mindful of how we dress, the casual dress. Okay, we're all at home now. It's important for organizations to set those guidelines. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we are managing ourselves in a way that's in accordance to HR. When it comes to on-site and off-site gatherings, what we have to keep in mind here is that when you are with your coworkers, it is considered a work environment. So when you're with people, even if you are gathered in a social setting, if they are your coworkers, you have to abide by these guidelines. And we could have a company party or trade show or some event, you know, that a conference or happy hours. We have to, again, these laws, these regulations still are in place because whether we're on site or off site, we are still engaging with our coworkers and our employees. And so the rules still apply. Any questions or comments? Anything was surprising there that you learned? Please put that in the chat box and keep moving. So when it comes to sexual harassment in the laws, we are presented with what is called intent versus perception. So intent versus perception. So here I'll give you this analogy. If you rear end someone mistakenly, so you have this accident, you don't intend to hit the car because it's an accident, but you are still responsible to pay for any damages. And that is the same way the law works. Intent versus perception. So when it comes to intent, how do you prove intent? What if the action was meant to be funny or non-offensive? How is the recipient of the comment or action to know your intention? What matters is perception. If someone's perception of what you did was harmful, that takes precedent over your intent. So someone's perception of your action is more important and relevant measure in the eyes of the recipient and the law. So if you make a joke that is meant to be funny, but that person that you made the joke to or about isn't laughing, you might not have meant to be harmful, but if they perceived it that way, then you have caused them harm, which could lead to other measures being taken against you. So now we're going to do a little exercise. I got polls. I'm going to be able to launch the polls, and I want you to vote. You can vote anonymously, and it's called, what do you think? So I need you to share with me whether or not you think that this is harassment. So I just launched the first poll. A group of employees often gather by the coffee machine on Monday mornings to tell stories about their weekend. They are loud, they tell jokes, and they share pictures from their weekend outings. Could that be perceived as harassment? Yes or no or maybe? Can you all see to vote? Ashley, can you tell if people can see it? Okay.
Yep. It looks like 94% done.
Oh, okay. I can't see it on my end, so you're going to have to tell me.
So I can. Do you see it?
So will you tell me how many people said yes or no?
Looks like 12% said yes, 41% said no, and 47 maybe.
Okay. So it depends on the content. I guess the answer is maybe. Listen, they could be talking about hiking. Being loud is not, it might be distracting, but it's not harassment. Okay? All right, I'm going to end this poll and I'm going to launch the next one. So I have to stop sharing this one and go to the next one. Jennifer is uncomfortable that two co-workers frequently speak in Spanish to each other in another language at work. Their conversations are animated and loud. Jennifer often wonders if they are talking about her. Is this harassment? Ashley, what do we got?
25% are saying yes. Oh, that just changed. Oh. So 28 yes, 28 no, and 44% maybe.
All right. So here's the issue. The way it's written, we're assuming that they're talking about her, but we can't accuse them. If they're pointing or looking at her, then that definitely could be perceived as harassment. But the fact that they're speaking in Spanish in another language, because we don't know what they're saying, we can't accuse them of being harassing. All right? You are allowed to speak another language according to Pennsylvania law in your workplace. Next one. Kevin just started a new job. He tried hard to fit in at first, even joking on a daily basis, in a daily exchange of conversation in the break room. But today the conversation took a turn. Kevin was not prepared for when his coworkers began gossiping and guessing about Sam's sexual orientation. Is this a form of harassment? While people are filling that out, I just want to go back to what the previous one where I was talking about the coworkers talking in Spanish. Just so that you know, one of the things that we might want to do in that situation is encourage those coworkers to include Jennifer, but it again can be seen. There was a situation in January of 2019. This happened at Duke University. Let me read this. Duke University had to apologize after a professor cautioned international students against speaking Chinese on campus, and he told them to speak English instead. So there's actually a situation that happened at a university to that effect. Okay, what do we have here?
94% said yes, and 6% maybe.
Yes. Kevin just started a new job. Yes, this is harassment. Guessing of sexual orientation, asking age, disability, race, all of that, that also can be perceived as harassment. Okay, we are on a roll. 2 to go. Catherine's job has been stressful lately, demanding long hours and hard work. She vents to her coworkers, stating that she is in a hostile work environment. Can this be perceived as harassment? Launching the poll. How's it going, Ash?
Looks like everyone's almost done. Well, it looks like 25% yes, 29 no, and 47 maybe.
Okay, I wonder if all the maybes are the same people. Let's talk about this. Even though Catherine's job has been stressful, a stressful job is not harassment. Now, if she's getting difficult work and she's expected to work longer hours than other people, then that is different. But having a stressful job is not considered harassment. And then lastly, Stephen recently asked his coworker, Jules, if she'd like to join him for a drink after work. Jules felt uncomfortable with the offer and politely declined, explaining she wasn't interested in dating right now. A few days later, Stephen asked Jules out to dinner and a movie, and once again, she declined. Can this be perceived as harassment?
It looks like 89% for yes, 11 for no.
Okay. For the person who said no, are you comfortable unmuting yourself and saying why? Any of those people that said no? Okay, maybe they're not. How about somebody who said yes? Would you like to share why you said yes?
I can, if you want.
Thank you.
So I think because he did it twice and didn't learn after the first time she said she was uncomfortable, doing it again is what constitutes the harassment to me.
Good answer, Rob. The first time he asked was fine, but the second time that could be considered as being persistent, and it's harassment. So what you have to do is be careful of also your position of power. So let's say if she was a subordinate to him, that could be considered harassment because she might feel that if she says no, then her job might be in jeopardy. So thank you for participating there, Rob. All righty.
Adrian, I also wanted to further that point as well. So hostile work environment is often categorized by the frequency of the harassment. So these two are, I'm glad that you put these two together because they can kind of inform one another. So just like Rob had said, it is exactly right that, you know, because he asked more than once, that is what is contributing to the hostile work environment. So when we look at the law and how there are two different categories, the quid pro quo versus the hostile work environment, you know, depending on whether or not he is a supervisor or if he's just a coworker on the same plane as Jules in this situation, that is really what is contributing to that hostile work environment that he is repeatedly asking, and that's what is contributing to that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you so much, Olivia.
Sure.
Okay. So here's an important note. Long tenure can mean a greater level with coworkers, but you got to be careful. Conferences, client events, anywhere where 2 or more employees is considered a work event and company policies are enforced. And we want to strive for an inclusive environment, free from stereotypes. Some of those, you know, we can have the favoritism. You know, you give those high visibility assignments to, you know, your favorite employee and the boys club, the girls club, or inner circles. So now let us look at what's been happening in the headlines in regards to sexual harassment. CBS suspended Charlie Rose. Let's take a look.
Charlie Rose, one of the most respected men in journalism, is off the air and facing sexual misconduct accusations from several women. Both CBS News and PBS have suspended Rose. His accusers tell the Washington Post that he put them in uncomfortable situations starting in the late 90s until as recently as 2011. Liam Martin joins us now with more tonight. Liam?
David, 8 women accused the 75-year-old of inappropriate behavior ranging from lewd comments to alleged groping. Rose says he disputes some of those accounts, but admits to wrongdoing and is apologizing. The 8 women, according to the Washington Post, were either employees of the Charlie Rose Show from the late 1990s to 2011 or aspired to work for him. Rose co-hosts CBS This Morning and has been a contributing correspondent for 60 Minutes for nearly a decade.
The Bureau is also expanding its presence overseas.
The women who spoke to the Post work for Charlie Rose, Inc., not CBS or PBS. The allegations in the Washington Post article include Rose making unwanted sexual advances in the form of lewd phone calls, groping, and walking around naked in front of the women. 5 of them describe Rose, whom Time magazine named one of their 100 most influential people in 2014, putting his hand on their legs to test their reactions. 2 of them said while working for him in his home or while traveling on business with him, he came out of the shower walking naked in front of them. Rose told the Post in a statement, quote, "I deeply apologize for my inappropriate behavior. I am greatly embarrassed. I have behaved intensively at times, and I accepted responsibility for that, though I do not believe that all of these allegations are accurate. CBS News said, quote, Charlie Rose is suspended immediately while we look into this matter. These allegations are extremely disturbing, and we take them seriously. Now, the accusations against Rose come as a second woman now claims that Minnesota Senator Al Franken inappropriately touched her, allegedly grabbing her behind during a photo. Lisa?
Liam, thank you. Charlie
Okay.
Rose.
So that is an example of a lot of inappropriate sexual harassment, poor behavior. And we all know that Charlie Rose, lost his job and is no longer employed with CBS. So there are a lot of issues there. Some of those issues involved employers not getting involved, and some of them involved, his own behaviors. So what do you do if you are harassed? There are responsibilities for the victim. The victim of sexual harassment is directed by policy to report the incident immediately to the supervisor or your human resource representative, because you should, in your workplace, have policies and procedures in regards to sexual harassment. Follow company guidelines to determine the designated contact or office and report any behavior you experience or know about that is inappropriate, as we just shared in this training. And if the victim does not report the incident, the company, in many cases, cannot be liable. Individuals who report or experience harassment should cooperate with management in order to receive a full and fair investigation. When I've done this training before, people want to remain anonymous, but it's going to be really hard to investigate your claim if they can't say your name. Like, okay, so you sexually harassed someone, Sarah, but if Sarah doesn't know who, how can she defend herself? How can we investigate? So if you report harassment to a manager or supervisor and receive an inappropriate response, like just ignore it, then you can take your complaint to the next level. And this is key. You don't have to be in violation of the law in order to be in violation of the policy. So it doesn't have to be a criminal act in order for it to be something that can be acted upon, because if it's a violation of policy, then action should be taken. Do you want to add anything there in terms of victim responsibilities, Olivia? That was just a real basic piece.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize how important it is if you do feel like you have been experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace, or if you want to just encourage, a more inclusive environment in your workplaces, always document no matter what. So if you always document what's going on, if you are experiencing harassment, make notes about it. Document what's going on, especially if you do take that step to report it to your HR, document that meeting happened. I do also want to emphasize that the EEOC does protect against employer retaliation as well. So let's say you do take something to HR and then you start receiving negative treatment from your employment, or maybe you even get fired or something like that. EEOC does protect against employee retaliation. So yeah, that is a big piece as well. So it's really important to document everything that goes on.
Fantastic. So these are the basic steps in an investigation. The employer is obligated to conduct an effective investigation, and it should include an interview with the complaining party, all those relevant documents. That's why Olivia said you want to keep records. They will interview witnesses, investigate all relevant applicable avenues, give the accused party a chance to share their perspective, and then they're going to reach a reasonable and fair conclusion based on the facts. And there might be some corrective action that needs to be taken. It might be a verbal conversation or warning or written warning. Perhaps it's coaching. maybe training and monitoring. It could include job or team reassignment or even suspension or determination, but that is dependent on your organization, on the situation, and on the repeated offense. So there are some corrective actions. Some potential remedies and damages could include cease and desist orders, hiring, promotion, or reinstatement. So sometimes when victims bring forth these claims or these allegations, sometimes they have to leave their workplace. So these are some potential remedies and damages. They include attorney fees and, you know, luckily us out here in Berks and Montgomery County, I don't think we need to worry too much about negative publicity. We're not influencers or a Harry Weinstein type. So Olivia mentioned retaliation. That could be a demotion. Maybe they change your work schedule or your location, but it's any negative action by a supervisor, manager, or employee. And we have about 2 slides left. So how can you be a supportive bystander? Well, if you're not part of the solution, you could be part of the problem. So the more people who witness an event, the less likely the event will be reported. So preventing workplace harassment is everyone's responsibility. Don't just take out the cell phone cameras. We need to really get involved. So how to be a supportive bystander? Well, people don't step forward for many reasons. Fear of retaliation, because that might cost them their job, or they adopt the actions of others as acceptable. Oh, that's just Charlie being Charlie. I know you've heard that before. I've heard that before. If you want to work here, you need to learn, you need to get used to this. This is how, you know, that's just how things go. But we want people to be able to step forward. Here's a little quick fun video before we end.
In other places, citizens may dress up like Batman, or a kid might save the day by taking over the wheel when a bus driver becomes incapacitated. But in New York City, we have Snack Man. That's right, Snack Man to the rescue. Man breaks up subway fight by fearlessly eating potato chips. A man and a woman were fighting on the subway. She said he'd been following her. Enter Snack Man.
Had his hand up, inserted himself, continues to eat his chips.
Security expert Steve Cardian was impressed and New Yorkers were smitten, giving Snack Man a red cape, and all Snack Man did was masticate.
Do not follow me. He changed the context, he changed the dynamic, and he de-escalated the incident.
Steve Cardian says most people don't really want to fight if they have an excuse to disengage.
It's like kind of the kid that, come on, I'm going to beat you up, and Johnny, come home. Oh, I would have beat you up if my mother didn't call me.
The only thing he says Snack Man did wrong was to leave himself vulnerable by completely turning his back to the guy. New Yorkers appreciate it. Cool.
Okay, so I just wanted you to see in that video, which was kind of fun, but you know, how intervene. Even if you just step in between those persons, we all can take actions. So to be a supportive bystander, make it clear that you won't participate in harassing behaviors and don't watch or encourage the behavior. Disrupt the situation. Ask, are you okay? Maybe you talk to the harasser later, but you want to communicate respectively and have open dialogue. The bottom line is, if you are wondering whether or not something can be perceived inappropriate or not, just don't do it, okay? So that is the end. I want to let you all know, because now we talked about this sexual harassment, maybe you need to have now some kind of stress management. So in the next couple weeks, we are having Dominic come in and talk about mindfulness and Aaron come in and talk about mindset and performance. So that is the end. Heather, you get to close us out. You're muted, Heather. Oh, maybe I have to unmute you. I'll unmute you.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Adrian, thank you so much. You are always so wonderful leading these sessions. We can't thank you enough for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. And Olivia, thank you for joining. She came in. She said some great tips that we really needed. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. But Heather, you let me know what else you need from me. I can send you a handout of that information. If you think it's helpful, you and I can talk, or you can email me, okay?
Okay, wonderful.
Have a great day,
Thank
everybody.
you. You too, Adrian. Thanks.
Bye-bye.